is of his form. Friends, he is not only a chartered accountant, he is also a qualified law graduate, and he has a vast experience on the subject on which he is making his presentation today. He has contributed to various journals, including the international magazines ITA, ITRBNA. He was also a part of International Tax Committee of the PKF and has contributed various articles in journals and the magazines and the newspapers. He has been also the Direct Tax Committee member of the International Tax Committee, the Corporate and Allied Law Committee of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, the University. And before he became partner in the Ernst & Young, we all know that he started his career with Ernst & Mehta and Company, then moved to Arthurs for a part of the small period, and then became a part of RSM, PwC, and now he's in Ernst & Young. He has a vast experience, and I am proud to present him before you for this technical session. Before I request Sanjay to speak on the subject, may I request our Mr. Hitesh Shah to present a memento of love of affection with Sanjay Gupta. Friends, Sanjay has always been a part of Chamber as and when we have any program on international taxation and transparency. Sanjay, my please.
Good afternoon to all. At the outset, I will thank Chambers for regularly inviting me, and this is one of the prestigious conferences that happens just before all of us get into the TP season. And when I say TP, sometimes it is used as time pass. But once we do that, over the year, but I think this is the transfer pricing season. Thank you once again. And it's always a privilege, and when we have seniors like Arvind sitting in the on the other side, it always makes in that sense a difficult exercise for the speaker. Before just I understand that we've gone through FOTA, QB, and the benchmarking, etc. But this the topic that was allocated to me on the on the incentives. So whilst benchmarking is an important exercise, and I believe that when it comes to the incentives, etc. I think that's going to be the last stage. I think one will have to really first understand, conceptualize and strategize before we really get into any kind of a benchmarking, because these sessions are very peculiar. And we have been dealing with these sessions. It's not that this transfer pricing has come for the first time as far as incentives is concerned. There were always provisions under the GAG. And I was just discussing with Mayur Bhai that why this SPT has come. There have always been provisions. There are enough provisions, enough for safeguards within the existing sections, but nevertheless it's part of the law, so we are also part of that process, and we'll have to do whatever needs to be done. So just coming to just as a quick snapshot of why, so all of us will know what is STT, but STT in the context of incentives, so it will impact any transaction which is therein under ITI A. Then you have ITI IA, where you have dealings between units of an assessee. Then you have ITI A10, where you have dealings with another entity, and of course any transaction under 10 AA, etc., or anything which may be prescribed, and we will see after 2-3 years what is the retrospective amendment. So again, just going to quickly, what are the industries that will get impacted because of these provisions? Clearly, infrastructure, distribution of power, and I think there will be issues around that. Telecom services, industrial park development, development of SEZs, operating and maintaining a hospital located anywhere in India. Enterprises in special category states, the northeastern states, and of course the 10AA. So just to get into, as I mentioned, that benchmarking will be something which will come at the last stage, and therefore it is very important to just analyze these sections before you really get into the benchmarking exercise. Because what really this section says is that so first of all, what are these sections intended to cover? One, to cover inter-unit transfer. 8IA, all of us know that it only covers between inter-units, so it's quasi-assessing. Now covers cases where taxpayer is entitled to deduction, 10AA, and what it says is that whenever you are transferring any goods or service held for the purpose of eligible business to any other business of that same assessee, or from that business to the eligible business. So therefore, it covers in that sense both way as far as the incentive sections go, and we have seen that as far as 40A, 2B, payments, etc., that it only applies to expenditure. But these are sections which are going to be impacted on both on the revenue and the expense side. And what are the three elements? That first of all, they have to be goods or services. And when we say goods or services for the business, means somewhere it leads to that should be at least relating to any trade or other activity carried out by that person. Then it becomes goods or services for the purposes of business. And of course there has to be a transfer of those goods and services. So it could be, whether it is a head office, or if a company is operating out of two units, one is an eligible unit and another is not an eligible unit, and whether there are links between the two, are those done as if it is done in a normal business scenario. And again also that you will always have someone in an HO, there will be centralized, there will be a key management who will be looking after both the units. It's not that each unit may have its own resources, but definitely there will be overall management that will be looking into it. There will be people who would be doing some common corporate functions, etc. Say for example, the CFO or the chief accountant or the chief tax manager who will be looking after the entire business. And therefore, the question really comes is that those are the people who are common, who are doing work for all the units, irrespective whether it's an eligible unit or it's not an eligible unit. So therefore the question really comes is that when you are computing the profits of those units, how do you allocate or take the cost which is lying, which are common costs as to those units? Because somewhere down the line, is one required to attribute those costs? I think we do that today also, right? There are certain common costs, etc. We do allocate on some, keys, etc., whether it is relative or a cost base or otherwise. But here the question really comes is that what happens to that common cost? Are we required, because of the new provisions, to allocate each and every cost? I think that's the question. So if one was to really break up the section and look at it, and as we saw in the earlier slide that there has to be goods or services held for the business and which are transferred, etc. So again, taking the examples which I was giving is that there would be some common resources, some common expenses at the HO level, and whether you need to do any transfer pricing for that. So what could be those? Is IT supports accounts, HO financing out of capital or accumulated profits, temporary use of funds, temporary use of capital assets. I think, in my view, that if one reads the section and then the intention of the STD, etc., I think somewhere we will come to a situation where some of these expenses really need not be strictly looked upon from an STD perspective. Because, clearly speaking, when a central, say, the top management who is sitting, they are not actually providing a commercial service in that sense. So, in my view, if you have to read the section clearly, technically, it leads somewhere to that if the activity that is being done is in the nature of a commercial services. In that situation, in my view, the STD should really apply, otherwise one should really not apply those STD provisions. Because, again, as I mentioned, the challenge will also come ultimately when you will have to do the benchmarking. Of course, that cannot be the reason that because I can't benchmark, I should not comply with the provision. But clearly speaking, at least the section indicates that only if it is a commercial services, it will attract the STD. Now let's come to a more a complex situation. If we were to say that this certain common or management functions etc. are not commercial services, but there could be situations where supply of power by captive power unit to the manufacturing unit. Now the manufacturing unit may be a non-eligible, but the power unit is clearly an eligible unit. In that situation, what will happen? So just taking the analogy which I mentioned, in this situation the power supply is the core activity of the power plant of the eligible unit. So therefore, if any power is supplied to the non-eligible unit, in my view the STD should trigger, because that is the core activity of the eligible unit. So if we have to again come back to our earlier management, key management or top management looking after the entire business and the supply of power to the manufacturing unit. Then supply of intermediate goods to the unit manufacturing final goods. Again, this will trigger. Again, allocation. And I think always when we were doing the 8 those certifications etc. As I mentioned, under the normal gap also we will try and allocate expenses to the extent possible, which are either directly attributable, and we have decisions of Wipro etc. where directly attributable expenses should be allocated. But still, whether as far as the STD goes, again, whether some of these common expenses which are not directly attributable to any units, whether we still need to do allocation. I think on a practical basis, and then looking at the overall intention of the STD etc., the penalties etc. and all of that, maybe allocations happening on a reasonable basis should really be then a position that a taxpayer can take. So, as I was mentioning, if you have a head office, you have an eligible unit 1, and there is eligible unit 2, and then there is a non-eligible unit. I think a fair allocation on the basis of normal gap, etc., I think should suffice even from a STD perspective, and therefore really in that sense there is no benchmarking in that sense necessary as we do it in a normal situation. So a cost allocation on a reasonable basis should actually really suffice. Again, if there is, the function that is performed is not something very unique or something which is not very extraordinary, then there is no markup that is really required in that sense, because a markup will become relevant if the service, if the recipient is an eligible unit. Then in that situation, the question will come that whether there should be a notional charge along with a markup. And of course, we have seen that there are sections etc. where they say that if SDT applies, then the ELP, otherwise the fair market value. So the sections clearly provide that if it is not a SDT, then the fair market value will still hold good. And we know that when we say fair market value, it will again what we are doing even today in that sense. Please feel free to ask any questions, even in the course of presentation. Once we will have 10 minutes last to answer those. But if you have any questions on any particular slides, please. So let's get into another case study whereby you have a company where there's which has a eligible unit, and then you have a head office, and the head office, the funds are managed by the head office, and then there are funds specifically allocated to the eligible unit. So the question will come is that when I am computing my profits of the eligible unit, do I really need to have again some kind of a notional charge for the financing that has been made available to the eligible unit? We know clearly that when it comes to Fortire 2B, if there is no expenditure etc., it will really not cover. But again, this is an incentive section. So whether because of this finance which has been made allocated to me, is there some kind of a notional charge or an interest that should have gone? In my view, clearly, if those are own funds or out of accumulated profits, there is no reason as to why there should be any notional charge. Of course, if there are out of any borrowed funds etc., again there is no payment etc. going, therefore should not be an issue. But the only thing is that one will have to see that whether there can be any disallowance for the interest paid by the assessee under the normal provisions of the Act. But as far as the SDT goes, I don't think that any allocation or a notional charge is really necessary to meet from the arm's length perspective. Then if you were to take the reverse situation, that what will happen if the unit has its own funds etc., and it has some surplus funds which it is then transferred to say the HO or the non-eligible unit. Then in that case, is there any transfer pricing really necessary? A situation could arise. In my view, I don't think that tax office would be really interested in that. But what can happen, and it can happen in our world, because we know, they may say that the eligible unit should have earned some interest because it is transferring, and then that is a transfer pricing adjustment, and therefore it is not entitled to any incentive because you have a specific prohibition that if any addition is made by the income tax officer, that is not eligible for, and also they may say then it is not derived from. So we have been fighting on on the issue of derived and not derived, but ideally it should not have any TP implications as such. But this is how our world works. So I think it just needs to be.
So in that case, deduction also will not be given in the non-eligible unit, and it will be taxed in the end of the eligible.
Exactly. Because when it comes to, yes, you are right, when it comes to eligible and non-eligible unit, from TP perspective, they have to be treated as two independent units. Very clearly. Okay, I think I have given, there is another case study whereby the company has an eligible unit and a non-eligible unit. Therefore, I think for our purposes of our discussion, the income column where I mentioned the exempt unit and the non-exempt unit. I think for the purposes of our discussion, let's just ignore the non-exempt unit income. So, so what has been written by the taxpayer is that the exempt unit income is 100, gross total income is 200, and therefore the deduction claim is 100, and therefore the total income offered to tax is 100. Now what can happen is that if the AO was to enhance the income of unit 3 for whatever reasons, maybe there can be some fortnight to be disallowance also relating to that unit. Say for example some TDS non-compliance has happened and therefore there is an addition. So if it makes it to 120, and as we saw that because of the specific prohibition, that 20 will not be available for deduction. Of course, in that situation, the overall income will still remain same. But what can happen is if the AO reduces the income of unit, then the total income will get higher by 120. So in the last situation where if there is any payment, say going to a non-eligible unit, which the officer finds that it is on a higher side and therefore makes a disallowance, that would be the situation where there